Year 1914. A small, remote island, no cities, no crowds. Just a lonely lighthouse, ... and a secret hidden deep beneath the ocean. The film opens with a ship sailing through the South Atlantic Ocean. On board is a weather officer named David. Crew is heading toward an isolated island located in one of the deepest parts of the Atlantic. David has been sent by the government to study the island's strange weather patterns. He's supposed to live there for a whole year, collecting data before returning. Along with Captain Axel, David carries a year's worth of supplies and essentials. After a long voyage, they finally reach the island. Using a small boat, they bring David and his equipment ashore. There's only a lighthouse and a small house where David will stay. Previously, another weather officer lived there, but his duty term had ended. From today, David is the new weather officer. The old officer, Robert, is supposed to return home with the captain. But when they enter the house, they're shocked. There's no sign of anyone. The furniture is overturned. The place is a mess. Hoping to find someone, they head to the lighthouse and witness something even stranger. The entire lighthouse is surrounded by sharp wooden spikes, like someone was trying to keep intruders out. They knock on the gate multiple times, no response. Finally, they force the door open. Inside, they find a man named Gruner lying upstairs. When they ask him about the previous officer, Gruner answers indifferently, he's dead, some terrible disease. When the captain asks about the body, Gruner's reply is even more unsettling. Maybe someone killed him. His behavior confuses both David and the captain. Gruner seems mentally unstable, but without solid answers, there's little they can do. The captain offers David a choice to come back with them, but David refuses. He knows if he can complete this mission and report accurate data to the government, he'll be paid well. He needs that money, so he decides to stay. Captain Axel hands him a gun for protection, just in case. Clearly, this place is not as safe as it looks. After the ship leaves, David starts organizing the house. While going through a drawer, he finds a diary belonging to the previous officer who had arrived here in 1913. The diary is filled with details about the island, though much of it is unclear or incomplete. There are strange sketches of unknown creatures. David assumes the man must have been bored and drew them to pass time. On one page, there's even a photo of the officer's wife. While reading, David dozes off. The next morning, he starts his work, but as he nears the ocean, he notices something odd: rocks arranged in strange patterns, with seashells placed between them. He suspects Gruner might have done it and returns to his task collecting weather data. During work, David uses binoculars to look at the lighthouse and spots someone with Gruner, another person. But then he thinks he's just imagining things. That night, David is busy recording data when he hears a knock. Assuming it's Gruner, he calls out but gets no answer. Holding a lamp, he walks toward the door and suddenly hears strange sounds. Then he sees it beneath the door, a bizarre hand trying to get in. It's not human. Terrified, David rushes to the basement and hides. The creature enters the house, searching for him. Through a small crack, David sees its terrifying eyes watching him. He grabs a knife, and when the creature gets close, he stabs it. Screeching in pain, the creature flees. But it could return any time. David ties the basement door shut with rope and spends the night awake, filled with fear. Next morning, he steps outside and sees footprints in the sand, but they're not human. They lead straight into the sea. Now it all makes sense. The sharp wooden stakes around the lighthouse were to keep that creature away. Realizing the house isn't safe, David runs to the lighthouse, begging Gruner to let him in. Gruner refuses, telling him, "You should have left with the ship." Rejected, David returns, determined to secure his home. He boards up every window with wood, surrounds the place with sharp stakes, and places old papers and books outside. The door soaked in oil to scare the creature away with fire. But there's still something David doesn't know, a truth he's about to discover tonight. Fortunately, while checking the house, he finds an old box. Inside it is a gun. After that moment, David finally had someone to talk to. Slowly, the ship disappeared into the ocean before his eyes. He was left with nothing else to do. Days passed. Gruner continued to treat both David and Daenerys cruelly, but he was especially brutal toward Daenerys, something David deeply resented. One day, David gifted Daenerys a small toy boat made from whale bones, hoping to lift her spirits. To his surprise, Daenerys led him to a hidden corner of the island where a real boat lay hidden. When David asked Gruner about it, he admitted he already knew. Months ago, an armed smuggling ship carrying explosives had sunk near the island during a storm. A few survivors had made it to shore using that boat, but none survived until morning. The creatures had killed them all. That story gave David an idea. If someone could dive down in their old diving suit, maybe they could recover bullets or dynamite from the sunken ship to fight the monsters. But Gruner refused to go anywhere near that part of the ocean. David, however, was willing to risk his life. More days passed, and a deep connection began forming between David and Daenerys. He had started to care for her, and Gruner noticed. For the first time, Gruner considered helping David, but in truth, his plan was sinister. He wanted David to retrieve the dynamite from the ocean and then leave him there to die at the hands of the creatures. That way, Gruner would get the explosives and regain full control over Daenerys. Together, they went to the hidden boat. David suited up and dived into the sea. The shipwreck was real, and luckily, they found some crates of dynamite. But then the creatures appeared. Panicked, David fell. His iron diving suit was too heavy to move in. He couldn't even send a signal back up. Gruner assumed the creatures had killed him. But in reality, only 2 small baby creatures had appeared. David built pressure underwater, removed the diving suit, and swam to the surface. They recovered the dynamite crates and planted them in 2 layers around the lighthouse, preparing for the next attack. Months passed. Snow began to fall, but the creatures vanished again. No more attacks. Their daily routine was back to maintaining the lighthouse and keeping guard. Gruner grew restless. He started to believe Daenerys had warned the creatures about their dynamite trap, which is why they hadn't returned. He lost control and violently attacked her again, but David stopped him. Eventually, they formed a new plan. Leave the main gate of the lighthouse open so the creatures would walk right into the trap. That night, the creatures rose from the sea and moved straight toward the lighthouse. As they entered, they attacked David. He fought bravely. As the creatures neared the lighthouse, Gruner pulled the detonator, but nothing happened. David had disconnected the wires and forgotten to reconnect them. David rushed upstairs to fix it. Meanwhile, the creatures started climbing the lighthouse, and Gruner tried to stop them alone. As soon as the wiring was complete, David triggered the first blast. Many creatures were killed instantly, but more were still coming, so Gruner detonated. The second layer, the explosion knocked both men unconscious. By morning, they awoke to find Daenerys missing. Dead creatures lay scattered all around. Gruner killed any survivors, even the wounded. David then noticed a necklace around the neck of one creature. In that moment, he realized the horrible mistake they'd made. These weren't just mindless monsters. They were intelligent, possibly even civilized, just unable to speak. Perhaps their attacks had a reason. But to Gruner, none of this mattered. He still believed he was the king of the island, and everyone had to obey him. After that day, the creatures never attacked like before. But every day, from the ocean shore, David would hear a distant cry like mourning. He had no idea how much damage had been done, how many families were torn apart, how many children lost loved ones, all because of one misunderstanding. The next day, David saw small creature children near the ocean, those who had lost everything. He built a circle of stones and placed the toy boat in the center, hoping Anaris might return. But no matter how long he waited, she never came back. One morning, David found Gruner unconscious, surrounded by old belongings. Among them was a photo, the same woman from Gruner's diary. She was his wife. Gruner's real name was Robert. He had come to the island as a weather officer about a year ago, but grief, loneliness, and the loss of his wife had shattered his mind. He changed his name and chose never to leave the island again. After seeing all this, David gave up hope of ever leaving too. The next evening, as he stood by the shore, he noticed the toy boat was gone. In its place stood a small creature holding it. David gently tossed his flashlight into the stone circle to show he meant no harm. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted peace. Moments later, Anaris emerged from the sea, followed by the entire group of creatures. But this time, no one attacked. They wanted peace too. They only wanted a safe place for their children like any living being does. The presence of humans had terrified them, and that's why they attacked. But Gruner never understood that. Gruner stepped out of the lighthouse with a gun. David tried to reason with him, telling him the creatures didn't want war, just peace. But Gruner didn't listen. He shouted at Anaris to go inside. For the first time, she didn't obey because she was no longer his servant. She was a mother protecting her children. Gruner began to realize that no one obeyed him anymore. Feeling weak and angry, he marched toward the lighthouse. David hoped Gruner had finally understood that no creature wants to live as a slave. But Gruner wasn't that wise. He fired a flare from a signal gun that struck and killed a small creature child. Panic spread. The creatures fled. Anaris, heartbroken, lost all trust in David. Enraged, David stormed into the lighthouse and attacked Gruner. Why did you do this? They just wanted peace. But Gruner was beyond saving. He raised an axe to kill David. Just then, David called out his real name, Robert. That one word stopped Gruner in his tracks. The truth hit him. Robert had never been a killer. Isolation, grief, and depression had turned him into this monster. The creatures never wanted war. He had murdered them only to feel powerful. Finally realizing his mistake, Gruner surrendered to the creatures. Within seconds, they killed him. David locked himself inside the lighthouse. Time passed. A year later, a government officer and a new weather officer arrived at the island. David was rescued, but the government man mistook him for Gruner, and David didn't correct him. He silently walked to the lighthouse balcony and stood there, saying nothing because now, like Gruner once did, he too didn't want to leave this island. Meanwhile, Anaris lived happily with her family, free, no longer afraid of men like Gruner. They could now live freely on land and in the sea. And so many bullets. Seeing them gave David a bit of courage, but the fear still lingered. As the sun dipped and darkness spread, David sat silently in a corner of the house, gripping the gun tightly. His breathing was heavy. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise. When he moved toward the window, his heart sank. It wasn't just one. Several of those bizarre sea creatures were rising out of the water, heading straight for his house. Within minutes, they began trying to break down the door. David immediately started shooting. A few creatures fell, but the rest became even more violent, desperate to get inside. As their numbers grew, David wasted no time. He lit the old papers and books he had placed outside the gate. The fire scared the creatures away, and they retreated back into the ocean. But now that same fire had spread to David's house. Made entirely of wood, the structure caught flame like dry straw. Wrapping himself in a sheet, David broke through the burning door and fled. He took shelter behind a large rock near the lighthouse. His right arm was severely burned. Luckily, it began to rain just then. Slowly, the fire was extinguished. But even after a night of rain, by morning, David's home was nothing but ashes. He knew now that if he wanted to survive, the only safe place left was the lighthouse. He grabbed his rifle and hid among the rocks near the lighthouse. When Gruner stepped out to fetch water, David followed him, planning to hold him at gunpoint and force his way inside. But suddenly, one of the strange sea creatures standing right beside Gruner attacked David. Gruner stalked him and said, "She's my pet." David didn't shoot, but laid down one condition. If he was to survive, Gruner had to let him stay. David had enough gunpowder and food for both of them to last a year. Gruner hesitated, then agreed. Before nightfall, they brought the remaining supplies into the lighthouse. The next morning, that same creature was quietly licking David's injured hand while he slept. Shockingly, by the time he woke, his hand was nearly healed. David couldn't believe what he was seeing, but it was real. On the top floor of the lighthouse, he saw Gruner counting bullets. Strangely, the creature was also helping him in her own way. This meant she wasn't inherently violent. David was curious now. He wanted to learn more about her. This was nothing short of a miracle. A female creature risen from the ocean's depths, peacefully coexisting with humans. If this story reached the world, both he and Gruner would become famous. But Gruner didn't want any of that. He didn't want to leave the island. Gruner had no family. In his view, no one in society could live alone. Everyone had to serve someone. That's why the island was perfect for him. Here, he was the king. He had even carved Gruner as king on several parts of the island. But how had that female creature become his pet? It turns out Gruner had once saved her life. She'd been caught in a fishing net when she was young. After that day, she never left him and followed his every command. But Gruner, being an aggressive man, never treated her with kindness. He had regular physical relations with her and abused her frequently. Once, she had attacked Gruner in retaliation. In response, he punished her so brutally that she mentally submitted, starting to see herself as his servant. Perhaps this was why, every night, those other sea creatures emerged from the ocean to take her back. But they never attacked during the day. David had had enough. He wanted to leave the island and began hoping for a passing ship to send a signal to. But Gruner told him no ships ever come this way. David didn't believe him. He felt suffocated on this island and desperately wanted to escape Dot as night approached. Gruner told David to get his gun ready. Those creatures could attack at any moment. They prepared to turn on the lighthouse light, but it was already too late. A massive swarm of sea creatures emerged and charged toward them. Gruner opened fire relentlessly, but David was frozen in fear, retreating inside. Despite Gruner's repeated calls, he remained curled up in a corner until he eventually passed out. Gruner had to fight them all alone. The next morning, Gruner woke David in anger and said, "If you want to stay here, you'll follow my rules. Fetch water daily, maintain the lighthouse, and take night guard duty." David had no choice. Survival depended on living in the lighthouse. He agreed to do all of Gruner's chores, but one thing always bothered him: how Gruner physically tortured the female creature daily. Still, David reasoned that after living in isolation for so long, it made sense for Gruner's mind to become unstable. At night, they resumed guard duty. Again, the creatures emerged from the sea. But this time, David wasn't afraid. He opened fire, but Gruner did nothing. Instead, he locked the lighthouse gate from inside, leaving David to fend for himself. Gruner wanted him to learn how to survive or die trying. David screamed for help, but Gruner ignored him. Somehow, David made it through the night. By morning, Gruner found him covered in blood at the lighthouse gate. He had learned how to fight. Time passed. David handled all the lighthouse duties during the day and fought the creatures at night. The island began to feel like a prison. He constantly thought about escaping, about freedom. Gradually, a strange bond formed between David and the female creature. He began to feel sorry for her. He named her Anaris. He now understood the pain of isolation. Maybe she felt the same way. One day, they noticed the attacks had started to slow down. David assumed the creatures migrated during winter, like whales, or maybe they realized attacking these two was pointless. But Gruner disagreed. He warned that the creatures were breeding now. Their numbers were growing. A few more days passed. One evening after dinner, Gruner and David played chess to pass the time. But they made a fatal mistake. They forgot to turn on the lighthouse light. In the darkness, the creatures attacked again. David realized the creatures had now bred. Their numbers were overwhelming. 2 men and a few bullets weren't enough. They somehow reached the top of the lighthouse, but in the chaos, Gruner was seriously injured. The creatures were forcing their way in, and it seemed there was no escape. They had lost all hope until sunrise dot. As the sun slowly rose, the creatures retreated back into the ocean. Anaris tried to heal Gruner's wounds, but David now understood they could never win this war. Their bullets were nearly gone. Food was running out. Time was against them. The next day, while wandering outside, David saw a ship in the ocean. Rushing inside, he grabbed a flare gun to signal it, but Gruner stopped him. He didn't want David to leave. Anaris suddenly attacked Gruner. She wanted to protect David. She didn't want him trapped like her. Gruner, on the other hand, didn't want anyone to leave. This island was his kingdom. Anaris was his loyal servant. He didn't want to return to civilization, and he refused to let David go either. He had been alone for so long.